Rome calling. Rome calling. This is the Gentleman Ultra. This is the Gentleman Ultra.
Ma ora c'è Elkjaer che supera Pioli. Elkjaer in area. Rete! Sportivi veronesi è la miglior squadra d'Italia.
De corsa fino a stadio, sono tutto in balocca, ancora qua sul stomaco.
Special edition of the Gentleman Ultra. This time is not Richard Hall. Your host is Federico Falcomeni. Just for the day, we're at the Birreria Iter in Verona. Fantastic place just next to the Bentegodi Stadium. That's where presentation of Richard Hough's book, Verona Campione, Miracle of 85, has just been introduced. Mind you, presentation was in Italian. How come? Hello, Richard.
Yeah, that's a good question. Mine in Italian, I guess when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So we're in Italy, we're in Verona, so the presentation, even though the book is clearly targeted at an English-speaking audience, the presentation we decided to do for the local community here, guys who had contributed to the book, fans from back in the day who had contributed to the book, with the help of Matteo Fontana, who is a prominent local journalist here. He writes for the Gazzetta and the Corriere, so he was kind of master of ceremonies. His preferred language is Italian, so we, even though it's slightly traumatic for me, we did the presentation in Italian.
My other question would be, how did you become true gentleman of Verona?
Well, yeah, it takes time, I have to tell you. I've lived in Verona now for 14 years. I came here in September 2011, which is back at the tail end of the Berlusconi era. So our original plan was to stay here for 2 years, but I quickly realised that it's going to take me more than 2 years to learn Italian. It was probably going to take me closer to 10 years. But I also fell in love with the city itself. It's impossible not to fall in love and be inspired by a city like this. If you only have to think of Shakespeare and Dante and Tim Parks, of course. Not that I'm putting myself in that league, but you only have to think of names like that to realise what an inspirational place it is. And then, of course, there's the football as well, which is always interesting.
So if we can dive into the book a bit more, obviously it's nearly 300 pages, so pretty solid reading there. We start in the middle of the 1980s, so when Serie A is starting to be world famous. It's not yet at the level of the 1990s, of course, but it's getting there. So Diego Maradona just joined Napoli, Platini was there already, Zico was there, Rummenigge, Inter. So it was a good time to be there. Point is, even during the presentation, talking to some of the fans who were there, it surprised me to hear it didn't come as a complete surprise, the fact that we were challenging. In fact, if you look at the previous 2 seasons, Verona were cup finalists. Well, they lost both finals, but against Roma and Juve, which were the strongest team of the 80s anyway. And they lost after extra time against Juve after winning 2-0 the first leg, which is mad. So, on the tail of that, there were, momentum was building anyway. So, apparently, there was a feeling that something special was happening. What was your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the book is called Verona Campione, The Miracle of 85. And I probably committed the grave error of writing the title of the book before I actually wrote the rest of the book. So it didn't take me long to realise that this wasn't really a miracle, it was a project. And it was a project that began in the summer of 1981 with the appointment of Osvaldo Bagnoli, who was a kind of journeyman player and a journeyman coach who had just won promotion with Cesena, but idiosyncratically he chose to move to Verona, who were struggling, it has to be said, in Serie B. But he had a close affiliation or affinity with the club. His wife was from Verona. He'd played for Verona back in the 1960s. So he obviously recognised something in the city, saw something in what was happening around the club at that point, and decided to come and to give it a go in Verona. And that's really when the project begun. He won immediate promotion in his first season as champions of Serie B. As you said, the first season, the back-to-back Coppa Italia finals. The first season in Serie A they finished 4th, and probably by all accounts played the best football of that era in that season, better even than in the championship winning season, but didn't quite have the mentality maybe, or the experience, or the know-how to finish that season off and actually do something really, really incredible. So yes, I mean, they didn't come completely out of the blue. They had 2 really solid seasons in Serie A, but despite that, nobody was really expecting them to win the thing. You know, you had Juventus with Platini, who were dominating Italian football at that time. Inter were beginning to look like contenders as well. You had Sampdoria, who were about to enter a golden age. You had Maradona at Napoli. So there was Torino were a force to be reckoned with Radice, really experienced coach, who'd already won the championship there. So nobody really, even in their wildest dreams, expected Verona to actually win the Scudetto. To be competing perhaps and be in the top 5 was as good as anyone was really hoping for. But then you had the arrival of the two foreigners, if I can introduce that to the conversation. You had Bagnoli, you had Briegel and Elkjaer, who signed in the summer of '84, and they, as a number of players and fans described it to me, they were like the cherry on top of the cake when they came.
Yeah, another particular thing from that season is referees. It's still talked nowadays. So it seems like that was the very only season when it was like an integral draw. In fact, I've read, you can correct me there, there were like tiers, and then referees obviously were drawn out of those tiers. So there were like categories of referees, let's say. But it's a fact that, in that season there was no how do you explain that? Obviously, when reading on some interviews with Bagnoli or the players in the following years, they said, yeah, but anyway, who cares?
Yeah.
We would have won anyway, regardless. But still, lots of neutrals talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that always comes up because it is notoriously the cleanest season in Serie A history, because the referees were appointed randomly, whereas previously there was a commission that would appoint referees to particular matches, and the bigger clubs had murky ways and means of influencing the appointment of particular referees to particular matches. So this was famously the season when the referees were appointed not completely randomly, but almost completely randomly, and famously a minnow club won the championship that season. So yeah, that's a question that always comes up, but I think, to be fair, nobody really is suggesting that Verona weren't the best team and didn't win that on merit. I think it's the opposite really, that people are suggesting that without the ability to influence referees, then the bigger clubs perhaps didn't have the advantage that they may well have had in previous seasons. If you remember, Federico, there was Juventus had won back-to-back Scudettos against Roma and Fiorentina in extremely controversial circumstances in championships that went right down to the very last game of the season. And you also had, in recent memory, the Totonero scandal. So in the early 1980s, Italy, Italian football Serie A had a bit of a murky reputation, and so this intervention to try and introduce a degree of transparency into how the referees were allocated was a way of trying to clean up that reputation, and whether it was any direct bearing on the outcome of the championship that season, I don't think so. I think Verona were just simply they had decisions that went against them, but they were simply the most consistent and the strongest team over the course of the season.
Il numero 9, Magrin ribatte, rete segnata da Elkjaer, che dall'altezza del rigore ha battuto il portiere Piotti, una stangata.
There are lots of key moments over that season. I don't want to go through all of them because otherwise, we'll finish after the Coppa Italia final, which we don't want. But I don't know which one resonates the most with you, because I expect you to have talked about the shoeless goal from Elkjaer already 1,000 times. But the one at Torino, 2-1. Lest we forget, Torino then came closest because they finished second. Then that fantastic game in Udine, scoring 5 goals. They were leading 3-0 actually after 30 minutes, and then 3-3 and then 3-5. Incredible game for that era, to be honest. Or I don't know, drawing at Juve, drawing at Sampdoria with 8,000 fans, winning against Lazio at the very end, although Lazio then were relegated, but apparently they were mounting up a challenge for that game. And then obviously the game in Bergamo with 5,000 Veronese fans celebrating the league. So there are plenty. So which one or which ones actually resonate the most with you?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you could identify countless games that season. I'd probably go for 3 games which I think were of most interest to me, or particularly compelling when I was researching and writing about them. The first one, as you mentioned, was the victory against Juve quite early in the season on match day 5. Verona won 2-0. So the fact that Verona won 2-0 against Juve is already, at that early in the season, is already a pretty big statement of intent. Verona were unbeaten at that point, and that was a really strong sign that they were capable of something. Add to that the famous goal that is still celebrated to this day, which Elkjaer scored, having lost his shoe in the build-up to the goal. That was a big moment in which people began to sit up and take notice that Verona might actually be capable of something here. Galderisi scored, and Galderisi had been released by Juventus, as had Pierino Fana, another one of the outstanding players for Verona that season. So they'd both been released by Giovanni Trapattoni, not really considered good enough to play at Juve, but here they were running the show, scoring goals against Juventus. So that was a real early indication that something special was happening, and Elkjaer's goal there was really just one of those iconic moments from that season. The other game from quite early in the season was against Rome. It was the next weekend, actually, on the 21st of October, as Verona travelled to Rome, and it was a 0-0 game, which doesn't sound particularly interesting or inspiring, but it was a game where Verona's colourful, unconventional goalkeeper Claudio Garella really had just an outstanding performance. So for Verona to go there and bring home a point was just basically...
I was reading 9 on Gazzetta dello Sport, which was pretty unheard of.
Yeah,
I was reading all your book.
Exactly. So for for a goalkeeper to get points like that from the Gazzetta is pretty unparalleled. And he stopped everything that day. But Roma, who had the recently appointed Swedish coach taking charge, they threw everything at Verona that day and they couldn't score. And they at that point were considered genuine title contenders. So to come away from Rome with a clean sheet and a point was another significant moment in the season, and it suggested that Verona had the ability to get points in hard places. And then the final one that I like, the game I love, is the 3-5 game that you mentioned against Udinese, which comes much later in the season. Verona had gone through a pretty tough winter. It had been bitterly cold in Verona. The pitches were all full of waterlogged, snow, rain, wind, everything. So conditions were pretty horrendous. Verona went 3-0 up that day. Udinese pulled 3 goals back, and it seemed that this could be a turning point in the entire season. If Verona have bottled it, then it could be the beginning of the end of their championship campaign. But then at that point, the 2 foreigners stepped up, Briegel and Elkjaer, who scored a goal each to secure a 5-3 victory for Verona. And at that point, that was the point when a lot of commentators and even the players began to think they've got the ability to dig deep, the ability to face this adversity and come back and deliver 2 points, as it was. Let's not forget it was 2 points for a win back then rather than 3. So they're 3 games that I would probably say were key turning points, or key games that I really enjoyed taking a deep dive into.
Campioni, il Verona campione d'Italia 1984-85.
Reading through your book, it's very well written, of course, and it strikes me that you basically follows the season as it goes along, match day per every match day, and you put everything into context. So if Verona go to Como, then you describe the lake, and then you give a bit of history of the town, of the club as well, at what stage of the history they're at. Because it's easy to take for granted that some clubs were not in the position they are actually in 40 years ago. So it's good to read that you've got context, sporting context, but also cultural context in terms of the city, Italy, what it was. So it's full of details, which is great. One detail which I struggle to grasp, and maybe researching with the book you actually found out, how many kits did actually Verona have that season? Because it's supposed to be 2, so the normal blue one and the away yellow one, but then there are 2 different versions of each. So one is V-neck for the home and away, and then there are 2 different versions for the home and away kit, which is like diagonal stripes. Yeah. The neck is different, so even for the away kit, it's 2 different necks in different games, but manufacturer is the same because it's Adidas, isn't it? So I don't know if you've come up with any reason for that.
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and one that I haven't actually been asked before. Just to go back to what you were saying about the cultural context, that was so important for me when I was writing the book. For me, that period, the mid-1980s, is such a rich historical, social, cultural period, and I wanted to try and capture that in some way in the book, whether it be through the music or what people are wearing or the wider political context. So it was a challenge to try and, you could quite easily disappear down rabbit holes on the politics or the economics or the social side of things, or the terrorism in the UK and in Italy. Italy was just emerging from the years of terrorism, the years of lead. So it's very difficult not to fall into the trap of being dragged into these rabbit holes. Also, financially, football was changing at that point, and this is the point I think about the kits. Verona had a match sponsor or a club sponsor for the first time in canon. They had this relationship with Adidas, and they had that iconic yellow and blue kit with the pinstripes, and that it was really a kind of, I suppose, early sign, and the fact that they did have 2 versions of the same kit essentially, and they changed that is a kind of early indication that football was changing, and that there was going to be an increased commercialisation of the sport. There was going to be sponsorship. There was going to be competition between Adidas and Puma or whoever it happened to be to get the kit deal. This was the season before Berlusconi arrived, so in many ways it is a turning point. Many of the players who I spoke to in this book said this season was kind of the last season of innocence, really, after you had the arrival of agents and the kind of corrupting influence that they brought to the game, the increased demands, wage demands that were placed on the clubs. And then not long after that, you had the arrival of the television deals as well. So 85 for me is really a turning point in world football, especially when you consider what was going on in England as well. You know, you had the problems with the hooligans, you had the problems with the stadiums there. So that was all changing as well. And I think the fact that you had a club like Verona who was beginning to introduce a degree of commercialisation with their kits is just really a sign of that trend.
So shall we finish on a high maybe? And I know there are many key figures. Obviously you talked about Bagnoli, his humble origins, I think, where it's fantastic because nowadays if you think about any coach or player, it's difficult to find, you know, that story there, to be honest. But it's a different era, I am aware of that. But any other player, you were mentioning Fana previously during presentation, You saw him running nearby. Any particular player you really liked researching on?
Yeah, I would probably have to say Pierino Fana was the guy who I was most taken by, I think, you could go through them all, and I think that's the point about this team. It was a group. There were no major superstars who were like a Maradona or a Paolo Rossi, but as a group, they was full of charisma, full of personality. But if I had to choose just one, I would definitely go with Pierino Fana, partly because he's such a funny-looking guy. In the 1980s, you know, he's prematurely bald. He's got this big monobrow. He looks quite heavy set. He was quite a funny character back then. He'd come up through the Atalanta youth system, got plucked by Juventus as a teenager, won the championship 3 times with Juventus as a player in that squad, but never really fitted in Juventus. He just didn't. He was quite a shy character, quite a reserved character, and maybe just couldn't quite cope with the pressure. So when he came to Verona, he found that he says it was like being released. Bagnoli understood him. He says it's like being a bird let out of a cage. Bagnoli wanted him just to enjoy himself, to express himself on the football pitch. Gave him the freedom. He was a winger, ambidextrous, box to box, and he could start on the left and move over to the right. And when you look at the highlights from the games back in those days, he didn't score a lot of goals, but he was involved in all the build-up play. He would be taking the free kicks, the corners, assists, the number of assists. They weren't counting them back then, but you know, he was involved in a lot of goals. And I had the pleasure of speaking to him a couple of times, interviewing him for the book, and such a humble guy, considering he's one of very few players to have won the Scudetto 5 times with 3 different clubs. And then the story I was telling during the presentation there, this is on the 40th anniversary, so on the 12th of May, I was out running along the river here in Verona, running along the river. I'd done about 5 or 6 kilometres. I was practically dead because I'd been at the stadium the day before, and it was a bit of a party there because it was the anniversary, so I'd probably drank more beer than is good for me. So I was struggling a wee bit as I was running along the river, and then I catch sight of this kind of tall, bald, older guy running towards me, but with a real spring in his step and a real kind of determination and a speed. I was like really struggling. He was practically sprinting along the river, and as he got closer to me, I realised it was Pierino Fana. The day after the 40th anniversary of the Scudetto, he's out there running along the river, and that for me, it just kind of captured a moment of what it's like to live in Verona and what it's like to have these players who live amongst you, and you know, it was a beautiful moment, despite the fact that I was practically on my deathbed with the exhaustion from running along the river.
Thanks for that fantastic anecdote. You eventually all end up living up here. So, what makes this place so special for them and for you as well? Apart from the memories for them, but it's nice. It's nice over here.
Yeah, I mean, we got lucky when we landed in Verona because we didn't particularly choose Verona. My wife is of Italian origins. Her parents are both Italian, but from Napoli and from Tuscany. So we'd always thought one day we might come and live in Italy, but we thought probably in Tuscany and probably when we retire. But we had the opportunity to come over here a wee bit earlier than we'd been planning, and Verona was where we ended up, and we really landed on our feet because it's such a beautiful city, and you don't feel the pressure maybe here that you do in Rome or Venice or Florence to go and do sightseeing. And in Milan, I struggle in Milan sometimes just because it's so big. And can I say ugly? Can I say Milan is ugly? Is that okay? Compared to Verona, but compared to Verona, which is like an open air museum. So yeah, we really landed on our feet. And then, as I also said in the presentation, just it's so important when you come to a new country, a new culture, that you find a community. And in football, both playing and coaching and going to the stadium, I found a community here, and it's been a real pleasure writing about this really amazing period in the club's history.
Richard, thanks so much for your time. I really hope the book goes well, and we'll do our best with Gentleman Ultra to promote it, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Thanks very much, and I mean really genuinely appreciate you taking the time and the effort to come across from Milan on a Wednesday evening. It's incredibly kind of you, generous of you, really appreciated, and I guess it's a statement of what the Gentleman Ultra is all about. They do really love getting into these stories and giving people the chance to tell these amazing stories from Italian football, from Italian nostalgia.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Sogni di gloria. Beat, cos'era il beat? Una scuola e una città. Beat, Verona beat. Pugno in tasca e vanità.